Hello, and welcome to today's Young Alumni Career Development Series webinar program. My name is Sam Constance, and I work with the Alumni Career Development team at University of Chicago. Thank you so much for joining us today. On behalf of the university, please accept our support, compassion, and best wishes during what we know is a challenging time. We're committed to continuing to provide online programming to help further your career no matter where you're working right now. We'll begin our webinar shortly, but first I want to cover a few housekeeping items. If you have any issues with the audio portion, you may want to shut down programs running in the background or dial in from your phone. During the presentation, all attendees will be muted and off camera. If you have any questions now or throughout the presentation, please submit them via the Q&A function on Zoom, and I'll moderate a Q&A at the end of the presentation. Please note that this webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be shared with all registrants via email. Finally, we seek to end by about 1 p.m. Central to honor our commitment to bring you this program in an hour. Now I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled How to Network to Your Next Job. Our presenter today is Marty Gilbert. Marty is the founder and CEO of the North Shore Executive Networking Group, the largest and fastest growing job search networking group in the Chicago area. The organization is comprised of over 6,500 members, with more than 10 members landing new jobs each week. Over the past 10 years, his networking meetings, coaching efforts, webinars, and workshops have helped over 1,500 individuals to land new career opportunities. His what the hell approach to job search has gained significant notoriety as an unorthodox method that significantly creates more activity in job interviews. Marty's background also includes an extensive array of marketing, sales, and general management with Motorola Inc., where he helped launch several industry-first wireless products. He also held the role of Chief Operating Officer at Stats Inc., the nation's leading sports data and analytics company that was also the driving force behind the book and the movie Moneyball, which starred Brad Pitt. Marty's career is highlighted by over 25 years of international experience that included a position working in Tokyo for Dentsu Inc., the world's largest advertising agency, where his award-winning writing regularly appeared in Time, Newsweek, Businessweek, and Fortune magazines. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Marty Gilbert. Marty, take it away.
All right. Well, thanks, Sam. I'm really happy to be here spending an hour with all of you. There's a lot of information we're going to cover, and I want to get into a couple quick things. The first thing I'd like to do is just explain to you who the North Shore Executive Networking Group is and what it can potentially represent to you in the way of value. So the organization I started a little over 10 years ago. It was an accountability group. I was in a job search myself, and I have been in multiple job searches. And everything I'm sharing with you is based on my own personal experience. And it's applications that I've created that have been now been leveraged and used by other folks that are job seekers that they have found to be very helpful in accelerating their search. The North Shore Executive Networking Group is comprised of meetings, but we have now moved all those meetings online, so it's all webinars, workshops. These workshops can be 2 to 4 hours in length. I do a lot of coaching. I'll provide coaching packages, or I do one-on-one customized coaching for folks. And because we have such a large database, particularly of folks here in the Chicago area, we end up being a talent recruitment source for a lot of companies and talent acquisition teams that are trying to find good talent. And at the same time, because of my coaching, I am an outplacement service for a lot of companies that have been, unfortunately, letting folks go. We are the largest, fastest growing firm of our type here in the Chicago area. We've got over 5 people joining the group every day, and this is long before COVID-19. And even during COVID-19, we have more than 10 people landing jobs every week. I've had as many as 3 a day over the last 4 weeks. So while we are in a very troubling and concerning time, there is plenty of hiring that's actually going on right now. The group is comprised of all kinds of job functions and people from a multiplicity of different industries. I'm just going to mention a few of our upcoming events. On Monday, January 22nd, we've got a 1-hour webinar that's going to be going on. Our speaker is Richard Oberbrunner. Richard is a graduate of the Second City School of Comedy, and he's going to talk about how to bring improvisation into your job search, particularly when it comes to interviewing and networking meetings. And being quick-witted and fast on your feet is absolutely a skill that's got to be learned. The second meeting is going to be a workshop that I'm going to be conducting. It's 2.5 hours. It's on Monday, July 29th. This will be a very hands-on workshop, and it's all about LinkedIn. How do you maximize the value of LinkedIn and its platform during your job search? Because the average person uses less than 50% of what that platform can bring to your job search. So go ahead and mark these, as well as July 6th. One more webinar coming up. John Kennedy is our speaker. John is an executive brain coach, and he's going to talk about how to stimulate your brain to perform better during interviews and networking meetings. And he takes everybody that comes to the session through an exercise on brain training and how you can ultimately use this every time you're entering an interview, a presentation, or a networking meeting to really stimulate your mind so that you're much faster on your feet. So what are we going to cover today? Like I said, there's quite a bit, but I want to really break it down into 4 sections. Why networking? Why is it important? What value does it bring to you? The second is you've got to ultimately determine what is your message, because messaging is a huge part of the job search, and we'll talk about that. You've got to define who is your target, who's your target, who's the audience, who are you trying to reach, and then ultimately, how do you reach them? These are really the key components to really being a successful networker, and we're going to break them all down. So let's start first with why network. And why is networking important? Well, it's significant because more than 70% of all the jobs that are acquired today have some level of networking associated with them. It's almost unavoidable. And the fact is that a way into a company, oftentimes is through the networking path. And in its definition is really quite simple, okay? Using the personal relationships that people have with one another to increase their exposure to information and opportunity. And that's ultimately what leads to introductions into companies that you want to get into, which ultimately can help you get somebody on the inside working on your behalf so that you can become a candidate for an interview and ultimately somebody who's going to get an offer. So there was an interesting study that came out of the New York Times some time ago. And the question that was asked to the general population was, what are your greatest fears? Now, number 3 in the list was death, which I would have thought would have been number 1. But number 4 and 5 are really the interesting ones for me, because number 4 of the greatest fears that people had was walking into a room full of strangers. And number 5 was speaking in public. Now, I highlight these 2 because it's significant, because these 2 are very important skills when it comes to networking, particularly when you're networking for jobs, because you've got to get very comfortable with being amongst a lot of people, as well as speaking with folks in public in some cases, or speaking with folks one-on-one that you don't know. These are really important skills that you've got to get comfortable with, and probably one of the most important lessons that I would share with all of you is that when it comes to an effective job search, you absolutely have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. When you are uncomfortable, that tells me that you're trying things for the first time. And that's what a job search is all about. It's an opportunity to experiment, to take chances, to do things you've never done before, and you're going to learn. You're going to find out which things do and don't work, and then you're going to move on from there. But if you're not experimenting constantly and feeling a little bit uncomfortable, then you're going to be holding yourself back. So that's going to lead us to an important polling question, okay? What is your greatest fear when it comes to networking for your next job? And I'd like every one of you to answer just one, pick one choice. 1 is, I'm afraid of being rejected. 2 is, I feel like I'm bothering people. Number 3, I'm uncomfortable reaching out to people that I've never previously met or spoken with. And 4 is, I feel embarrassed about being unemployed. So take the next 5, 10, 15 seconds to go ahead and select your choice here, and then Sam is going to share the results with us. I'm always interested to hear what people have to say, what is the toughest part of networking, because quite honestly, networking is not easy, doesn't come natural to most people, and quite honestly, most people don't like doing it. But you've got to. So,
Okay, Marty, it looks like a little over 75% of the folks have voted. So I'm going to close the poll and share the results here. It looks like coming in at number 1 with 34% is, I feel like I'm bothering people.
okay.
Next, with 30% of our attendees have said that they are afraid of being rejected. 23% say that they're uncomfortable reaching out to people that they've never previously met or spoken with. And 13% feel embarrassed about being unemployed. Don't be
This
embarrassed
is
about being
this is
employed.
really good. This is good because I love to see the fact that there's such a low percentage for people that are feeling embarrassed about being employed, because you know what? It's a function of life. There are almost no people that go through life without being unemployed at some point in time. And the fact is that I grew up in an environment where people stayed with companies for 10, 20, 30, in some cases as many as 40 years. Okay, that doesn't happen anymore. And the whole dynamic of the employment situation has changed. So I'm glad nobody, very few people here feel embarrassed by it. So let's talk a little bit about the value of networking. It does make you relevant, and most importantly, it makes you visible. And we've already said that the vast majority of jobs out there are going to involve some level of networking, and particularly as you move upstream to more important levels of positions, the networking becomes increasingly more important and more significant. Yeah, it's an opportunity for you to create internal advocates inside companies, and you need this. You have to have people inside championing your cause. When you do that, you are absolutely accelerating the path to potential success, and you get people chatting all about you and why you're somebody that they ought to bring in for an interview. We also know that people, when they get referred into a company, they get preference. Their resume now rises to the top of the stack. Okay, and that's important because today that stack of resume is 200 and 300 pieces of paper long. It's just incredible the number of people that are responding to positions. And I have plenty of folks in my organization that apply to VP positions, and they're saying, you know what, it just went live on LinkedIn, a day and a half ago, and there's already 175 responses. So yeah, one of the things is speed. You got to be fast, but getting a referral in there is absolutely to your best advantage. And we know, and one reason why companies pay employees anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 if they can refer a candidate in who gets hired, they're willing to pay them big money for that, because they know, and it's been proven, that individuals that get referred into a company by an existing employee end up being better employees, because those individuals that have referred them in understand the dynamics of the company. They already have vetted that person. They know whether or not that person is likely to fit in, and they're going to recommend somebody who they think is strong. Very simple thing is that you always have to be getting more contacts. More contacts and more connections lead to more companies, which ultimately leads you to more introductions, and in the end, more interviews. You also want to take your network, and instead of you talking one-to-one with people, you have to be talking one to many. And you have to get many people in your network working on your behalf, and we'll talk a bit about that. And then the last piece here is viral marketing. The fact is, social media and all these platforms out there are a way to get from one to many in very short order. It's amazing how many people you can get to. And I'm probably as good an example of that as anybody. I created my first video several years ago. It was my what the hell approach to job search. It was 3 minutes long. That's probably 2 minutes too long. But within 7 days, I had over 10,000 views. And what did that do? It had everybody coming back and looking at my profile because they wanted to check me out. They were amused by what I had to say. It resonated with them. And now I was getting incredible traffic. The same thing is true when you're in a job search. And so don't hesitate to use a lot of things on social media, because this is all about you. Here's a few reasons why so many people fail in their job search today, particularly in networking, is that they just don't allocate enough time. They are not always growing their networks. They don't prepare adequately for networking meetings, and you have to prepare for a networking meeting. It's no different than getting ready for a big presentation. A lot of people make the mistake of not arriving early. And I'm talking about in-person big meetings that we all have many times been traditionally accustomed to. When you arrive late, you're an outsider. You come into that room and you just don't feel comfortable because everybody's already engaged. What you want to do is get there early, be a part of that engagement, and now you're getting value from the moment you walk in the door. And by all means, do not discount people based on their titles or what they do, because every LinkedIn connection has value. And it's not because of who they are or what their title is or what they do necessarily at their company. It's because of who they're connected to. That's why I put tremendous value on second-degree connections, because there's so many more of them, for one thing, and anybody that you're connected to has the potential to introduce you to all of their connections. One of the mistakes a lot of folks do after networking meetings, they just don't follow up. And you've got to do that. And that's what enables you to be memorable. So take advantage of that. You got to leverage your network, and you have to be very clear in what you're asking for. How can people help you? And we're going to look at an example email that works, and more importantly, is very clear with people on how they can help. Because in general, most people in your network that you do know, they want to help. They just don't know how to. And I will say, don't be disappointed if your closest friends, family members, relatives, the folks that are in your inner circle are not the most helpful people in your search. It's not unusual. They don't view you as a professional working person the way a lot of other people will, because they're just too close. So please, I can tell you, for most of you, your networking contact that's going to lead to your next job is probably going to be somebody that you did not know before you started your job search. Also, don't be afraid to take chances. This is a chance to experiment. And as I said earlier, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because I can tell you, a lot of people come up with a lot of reasons why there's obstacles out there. It's my age, it's my inexperience here, or it's people didn't get my message. The job seeker themselves are in most cases the biggest obstacle. It's up to you. There are so many things that you can control, and you need to grab a hold of them. So some of the key attributes to effective networking is that you've got to have a discipline. You've got to have a structured day. I do a whole 3-hour workshop on this and how you really plan out your time and make best use of it. And you've got to be willing to put yourself out there, take chances. You got to get the word out. This is where social media is so powerful. And you have to get comfortable with selling yourself, because everybody in a job search is now a salesperson. And so it comes down to marketing and ultimately selling the value you bring. You've got to be able to communicate effectively. And I see a ton of resumes and LinkedIn profiles and cover letters. And I can tell you, in all honesty, the general population doesn't write very well. And I'm obviously a very critical person because I grew up as a writer. And I'm very critical of it with people in job search. But it is the first impression you're going to make with people, and it's got to be a good one. And a little grammatical mistake, a misspelled word, or the inability to be clear, concise, and to the point can eliminate you right from the start. And one of the most important things here, I'm really big on number 7 and 8. One is you have to make yourself memorable when it comes to networking, because people want to help folks that stand out. When you make yourself memorable, you stand out, and you've created something that people are going to be able to think about when they think of you. And the last piece is that there are going to be a lot of peaks and valleys in the job search. There's going to be times when you're down on the 1-inch yard line and you think this job is mine. And for the craziest reasons, it doesn't happen, because companies are entitled to make poor decisions. And oftentimes, the biggest obstacle is a company's ability to not decide and to say, let's go another 6 months and see whether or not we really need to fill this role. So you've got to be able to pick yourself back up and bounce back. And that's where the resiliency really comes into play. And I am just a huge advocate of the fact that the most important aspects of the job search are all about communication and messaging. This is a marketing exercise. And anybody who tells you that the job search is all about an HR experience, I'm in total opposition to that. You've got to be able to package, position, communicate, message. You've got to write effective cover letters and have all the things that describe who you are and answer the question, why you? And networking effectiveness does rely on your ability to communicate, both in writing and verbally. And if you are not really clear in it, you're not going to get the kind of help and support that you want and that you feel you deserve. So let's talk a little bit about how you establish that message that's going to be an important ingredient in your networking. And at the get-go, one of the first things you have to do is develop an elevator pitch or a branding statement. You have to be able to answer the question, why you? Why should I be talking with you versus the stack of resumes over here that's about 170 high, and what makes you somebody that we should spend time with? And so you've got to really give a lot of clear thought to how do you differentiate yourself and come up with that one clear little phrase that brands you. I've given you a couple examples here for product manager or for a sales hunter, someone who brings in big deals to small companies, maybe. Project management. I love the last two, translating technical speak to customer value. Because one of the most important things when you're working for a technology company, and I've worked for several of them myself, is that things can get really deep in the engineering aspect and R&D aspect of what the company offers. But the most important thing is being able to communicate it in a way that the customer can understand, or that your distribution channel can understand and communicate in very easy language. And then last one, half geek, half marketing, 100% social media expert. This is such a quick and easy and edgy way to describe your value, but it's memorable. And people will grab onto this because they'll get it. They'll get it. And that's what you've got. You've got to really take the time to create this, because if you don't, people won't necessarily remember you in the way you want. And you've got to somehow figure out a way to stand out from the crowd. So I'm a huge believer in storytelling. And storytelling is an absolutely critical skill for a couple reasons. One is you've got to be able to synthesize the things you've done in your past and relate them to the jobs that are going to be yours, or yours that you're going to pursue. And stories are so much more dynamic. I tell people, resumes tell, but stories sell. And stories sell because they are the proof behind what you say you can do. And it's not enough to say that I grew revenue, or that I excelled in strategic planning, or that I helped cut costs on the finance end of things. You've got to be much more definitive than that. And so this is an exercise that every one of you should be going through whenever you have an interview coming up, or whenever you want to describe yourself in a networking situation, because these examples are the kinds of things that are going to enable you to demonstrate to people what you bring to the table. Whether it's top line growth, international expansion, cost cutting, time saving, you got to have these kinds of examples ready at the ability to just recite them in a very conversational way. So now you've got to define your audience, okay? And how do you do that? Every job search, and let's back up a second. Every company that introduces a new product, they don't take the attitude of, if we build it, they will buy it. Okay, this is not a field of dreams, and that is not the path to success for any company. They always do their research. They do the effort of, let's define what market segments we're going after. Who are those targets and why? You have to do the same thing, because now you're the product, and you have to develop a very strong target company. It gives you a lot more focus on what you're going after, because if you don't do this, then you're going to be like 95% of the job seekers out there who spend 95% of their time chasing online ads. I don't like the odds, because the odds today are more than 200 to 1. But when you create focus around jobs, and more importantly around companies that align with your background, you're going to go after those companies whether they have jobs or not, and that's important. And when you can also present a target company list to your network, now you can get your network working for you. It's not enough to say, I'm looking for a director of finance role, or I'm looking for a product management position. You've got to tell them the kinds of companies, the industries where you have passion and experience. And the process here is really 3-tier. You first have to identify what are the industries where you've been, or in some cases, I know many of you are early in your career, what are the industries you want to be in? What are then the companies that fit within every one of those industries? And then who are the key people that you want to be messaging to in every one of those companies? And this is just a simple exercise. I come out of the wireless industry. I spent many years with Motorola, but wireless is a very big industry, and it has a lot of subcategories under it. This is just an example of some of those subcategories. So I've just mentioned here what might be, I don't know, maybe it's a dozen or so categories. And within every one of those categories, there are a multiplicity of companies. So if I add it all up, there could be easily 60, I don't know, if there's 12 industries here, we've got, say as little as 10 in each industry, that's a lot of companies. And now you have to then find all the key people that you want to message to in every single one of those companies. So you're building up essentially a database for a marketing campaign. And that's where the marketing aspect of this is going to be so critical. So ultimately, you've got to build out this target company list. And I can tell you there's no better place than LinkedIn. LinkedIn is just a fantastic platform. I got into it very early on. I joined LinkedIn in 2004, and as a result, today I have over 13,000 LinkedIn connections. It gives me the ability to see so much more than the average person, and you can do searches by industry, by title, by geography, and combinations of those. You can also go into the University of Chicago alumni page within the LinkedIn platform, and you can see every single person by city and where they're working, and you can see their profiles. I mean, it's a fantastic feature by just plugging in University of Chicago into the search engine up in the platform, and it will then take you to the U of C's landing page, and then you can do a criteria-based search on all those folks. Connections of is another great feature, particularly for folks that have a lot of connections. You can filter on anybody's connections who is a first-degree connection to you. And then I'm a huge advocate of joining a lot of LinkedIn industry groups because that's where you really want to be, because you've determined these are the industries I'm interested in. Now, how do I start messaging and connecting and networking with folks in my sweet spot? So here's an example of a criteria-based search that you can do on any number of things. You know, you click up in the search bar. It gives you people in the drop-down menu, and you'll select people, and then it's to present a page like this to you, where you can decide, are you interested in your first-degree connections, your second-degree connections, what geographic area? I selected Chicago. What industry? I picked IT for this example. And then in the title, you can put any number of titles. I put CEO or Chief Executive Officer. It could be any number of job functions. You could say finance, you could say supply chain, any number. But it uses a Boolean search, and that's what's important here. It's case insensitive, with the exception of the words and or. And they have to have a space before and after those words. So it's CEO space, capital OR space, Chief Executive Officer. I could have continued on. I could have said space, OR space, VP Marketing, or any number of things. And then from that, you're then going to get results of all these people that meet this criteria. And in my particular case, there were 42 results of folks that were CEOs that currently are living in the Chicago area in the IT industry. And so for me, if I was going after an IT position, this is a tremendous find, because now I can start to find, and believe me, in every one of these cases, I've got people that might be able to make me introductions for me, because it shows me exactly how many folks are connected, to these individuals. So this is a great tool, and you should really get used to it, because to me, it is the most valuable tool on the entire platform. So when you start to find people, and I'm just showing you an example here. This is the CEO of a Chicago area company by the name of Prescaney. I'm sure some of you are quite familiar with it. And so I was able to find him rather quickly. But this area next to him, in that on the right-hand side here, where it says people also tend to view these other folks when they view this individual's name, it starts to give me the ability to really map out an entire organizational chart. It's going to show me a lot of people that report to that person. And so if I was an IT person, I selected this individual here. His name is Todd Fretch. Todd is the CIO. I saw that he was connected to the CEO. And then I can see all kinds of folks that are also people within Todd's organization. So if I was pursuing an IT job, I could find all kinds of IT VPs, IT directors, and managers that are part of Todd's organization. And I could keep going through this process and drilling down, because ultimately, I want to get to this. I want to build out a database. I've got to have a list of all the companies that I'm interested in by industry, and then all the people in every one of those companies that I want to be connecting to. So by way of example, right? So here's company ABC, the VP of Sales, VP of HR, the CEO, and the VP of Operations, okay? For those of you that are at levels that might be more entry level or at a manager's level, great, you go to the directors. Maybe you go to some of the VPs. One of the important things here is that you can't be afraid to reach out to folks you don't know. Now, granted, we want to try to go to our network first, but if there's no avenue there, then you should be emailing these people directly. And you want to keep a list here of the status of everybody that you've communicated with, and enter that into your calendar, because there may be follow-up. You email somebody on a Monday. If you don't hear by Thursday, you should be picking up the phone and calling them. So many people do not use the cell phone today for the reason it was invented. We invented that product for voice communication. We never dreamt it would do things like paging and messaging and getting to websites. Improbable. But the voice communication is the most important communication in my mind, especially today in COVID-19. Because think about it, nobody's working in an office anymore. Everybody's working from home. Guess what? When you call into that office main number and you enter that person's first 3 letters of their last name from the automated system, guess where that call's bouncing to? It's going right to their cell phone that's sitting right in their home, sitting in front of their laptop because they aren't being interrupted anymore by all of the chatter in the office, all the gathering in the common areas, and these endless, long, drawn-out conference meetings. Okay, those days are gone. And so more than ever, it's easier to meet, really reach people by phone today. And so you all should be doing this. This is an important ingredient of networking. So how do you reach these folks? Well, LinkedIn is one aspect, and it's great. It's a great database. It's got all tremendous information with regard to companies and people, but you cannot rely on just LinkedIn. The great thing about LinkedIn, it enables you to get from one to many. Your reach is absolutely phenomenal, but you can never discount human interaction because in the end, nobody is going to hire you without having that opportunity to experience you, whether it's face-to-face or through a Skype interview or through a Zoom call. But you've got to have that human interaction because we are purchasing individuals and what we believe they can bring and what value and difference they're going to make in the company. So when you get LinkedIn and networking on the human side working together, now 1 and 1 equals 3. And that's really where you need to be. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Find a way to balance the two and use LinkedIn as the research mechanism. And ultimately, you've got to get yourself out there because people are going to buy into you. And they won't know who you are, what value you bring, until you've ultimately had an opportunity to be front and center. One of the key things, and many of us have a lot of LinkedIn connections. We have big networks in some cases. And for those of you that don't, I urge you, start connecting with all kinds of people from your past. For those of you that are early out of school, go back to all your classmates, all your friends. If you have not connected with them on LinkedIn, do it. Go back to all your childhood friends. And start connecting with folks on LinkedIn that you don't know. And that's one of the values of joining LinkedIn groups. Because you can download all your LinkedIn connections and you'll have the ability to then prioritize who you're going to go to first and why. You can categorize them. Don't dismiss people because of their title. We've talked a little bit about that. But you've got to come up with an email, ultimately, that's asking for help. You've got to be very clear, concise, to the point. And here's a quick example. So in your email, and believe me, I see all different kinds of shapes and sizes of email, and there's nothing worse than somebody telling me just how wonderful the job search experience has been. Oh, the seasons are changing, and there's great things going outside. I've met some wonderful people. And they say, if by chance you come across anybody who's looking for a director of communications, please keep me in mind. That kind of networking message is going to go nowhere. It's going to go nowhere because you've given them no way to help you. But when you take an approach like this, you're much more specific. This is just a brief note to let you know that I'm in my next career search. Okay, I welcome your advice and networking assistance. Great, you've just flattered them. Maybe you win them over real quick. Now you got to say something about your background, a quick summary at a very high level. Could be 1 sentence, maybe 2. And now you have to be very specific on what you're asking them for. There's 2 ways you might be able to help me. If you know of any Chicago area companies between, pick a number, 50 million and 1 billion in any of the following industries, please let me know. Okay, I've been doing my research, but I could use some additional help because there are oftentimes a lot of privately held companies that don't have a lot of public information out there. And second, if you know of any individuals from those industries in the following roles, let me know. Would love to know who they are. I welcome your thoughts and appreciate, any effort or support you can provide. Okay, this is really short, it's to the point, but it's incredibly clear. And when you do that, you make it real easy for your network to help you, because if they can't, it's not going to take more than 5 minutes of their time. So your return on your email tends to go up astronomically, and that's important. There are tremendous benefits to joining a lot of LinkedIn groups. I myself always belong to at least 98. You can join up to 100. And one of the great things is that when you join a LinkedIn group, and there are global groups and there are local groups. I love the local groups, the Chicago area groups, because the majority of the folks in my organization live in the Chicago area. But when you join a group, you can see every member's profile. It can create some visibility for yourself. It's an opportunity to post on every one of these LinkedIn groups to make yourself visible. It will increase your connections, because now you can connect with all these people that are in an industry or in several industries where you've resided. And they can potentially, once you've established that relationship and connection with them, they might be able to make introductions that you otherwise would never be able to get on your own. Also, when you join LinkedIn groups, particularly when they're industry groups, it's a quick and easy way to really grow out your target company list, because every time you're looking at the people in these groups, you can see what company they're looking for. It's right there in their headline in most cases. And you might then look at their profile, you take a quick look at the company and go, interesting firm. Never heard of them. I'm going to add them to my list. And now you're going to go into LinkedIn and you're going to see, do I have any connections or networking contacts that can help get me into those companies? And if not, then I can figure out who are the key people on LinkedIn that I need to then make my background visible to, and I'm going to email them directly. Because we know that 95% of all the email addresses in this country are one of two formats. Everything's either jsmith@abc.com or john.smith@abc.com. And when both of those fail, you simply go to hunter.io, where you can just plug in the name of a company and it will give you examples of people's email addresses within every firm you put in there. One of the important things of posting on LinkedIn groups is it helps draw more traffic to your profile. And we want to get traffic to your profile because you have to treat your LinkedIn profile as if you're an e-commerce web store. It's an e-commerce website. And you can't sell things if people aren't coming and taking a look. It's no different when people go on Google and plug in a keyword or a phrase, they're looking for a particular product. And we know the results are going to be driven first by the advertisers, but after that it's going to be based on keyword matches. And the same is true with your LinkedIn profile. It's all about search engine optimization and having keyword matches on what your background has in it, or your profile, versus what the recruiter is looking for. So don't hesitate to join a lot of LinkedIn groups. I put here some examples of Chicago area ones from all different disciplines: banking, supply chain, advertising, accounting, Chicago young professionals. And there's quite a few of those here in Chicago. So you ought to look them up and join them. Now, when you're preparing for a large networking meeting, it's a bit different. And I know that at some point here, we're all going to be attending large networking meetings. When I hold my meetings, I'll get 100, 150 people at a meeting attending, all job seekers like you. But you got to set some goals when you're coming to one of these meetings. One is, it could be, I want to meet 5 people, or I want to have a follow-up with 3 one-on-one meetings, or I want to get warm introductions to 2 companies. Okay. It also, what's great about networking meetings, it gives you an opportunity to perfect your elevator pitch. If you're not practicing it, you're not perfecting it. And so you've got to get it out there, and you've got to, look for ways to constantly improve upon it. Make sure you're always bringing a business card with you to these sessions, but don't come with one of these glossy cards. They're hard to write on. Make it easy to take notes on cards. Make it, when you give your card to somebody, make it easy for them to make a note and how they met you. And bring a handbill. And I'm going to show you what a handbill looks like. Some of you may not be familiar with it. I talked about arriving early. Know when to leave a conversation. And it's real easy to get tied down by somebody who is pontificating about themselves. You got to find a way to get a friendly exit and move on to more interesting and more valuable conversations. Take notes on everybody that you meet. And there's a great function within everybody's cell phone It's the Find Nearby feature that's embedded within the LinkedIn application on any mobile device. It's a way to when you turn it on, anybody who's within your Bluetooth vicinity will pop up and you can instantly connect with them on LinkedIn. So in my meetings, for example, I'll have a keynote speaker for an hour and then an hour of networking. And all those small group networking meetings, I'll divide people up into groups of 10 or 12. Everybody always connects with this Find Nearby feature first, and then everybody gets 3 minutes on the clock to talk about their background and what companies they're trying to break into. And last one, number 9, is speed is important. Speed is important when you're responding to positions that are out there, because oftentimes things get cut off at 50 responses, 100 responses, and you don't want to be left behind. But the same is true with networking. Don't let a lot of time go by after you've met somebody, because when you wait too long, they'll forget who you are. And then when you finally send that email, it's not going to resonate with the way and value that it would if you had done it immediately the next day. This is the handbill I referred to. And whenever you go to a networking meeting, you should bring one of these with you. And it's a very simple one-pager. I just couldn't fit it all in one column here so you could see it. But it's all about who I am, what I do, what are my areas of expertise, what value do I bring? And then most importantly is the section at the very bottom, the target company list. Because when you hand somebody this list of target companies, it enables them to help you. And this is important, and you should divide it up by industry. When you prepare for a one-on-one networking meeting, make sure you link in with that person beforehand, because you want to be able to look at their connections. You want to review their profile. You want to see if you know people in common, if you have some common LinkedIn groups, and you want to do a connections of search on all of their connections by whatever it might be, the industry, the titles, the locations, and combinations of those. You also want to be really clear about the information you're looking for. I'm looking for opportunities in these specific industries. Can you help me understand a little bit about the organizational structure inside company X? Because that's one of the most important things, is where will you fit and who are the people that you need to be connecting with? You want to talk about industry trends, but most importantly, it's about getting introductions into key people and key influencers, because that you've got to get into the sphere of influence, because those are the people that can make things happen from the inside and in order to get you the visibility that you want. Now, this is an example of what I would do before every job search networking meeting. I would go into connections of, I would look at their connections, I would plug in the criteria I was looking for. And at the end of our conversation, I would simply tell the individual, you know what, I had a chance to go through all of your LinkedIn connections. And I found 6 people that you're connected to that I would love to get an introduction to, because they're either working in a company that's of interest to me, or they're in an industry that I really want to get into further. Do you know anybody here well enough to make an introduction? I never left empty-handed. I always got at least 2 out of 6. And that's 2 better than getting nothing. And if you don't ask, you won't get. This is so important, but it's a great and easy way to prepare for a more effective networking meetings. And I can tell you, I talk to so many people that tell me, you know what, I had 20 networking meetings this week. Great, what did you get out of it? You will get a lot more out of a networking meeting when you prepare for it in this way. And then the last thing I wanted to cover here was the ability for you to launch a marketing campaign. And this is a whole separate subject. I do a 3-hour workshop on this, but I just want to share with you what you ultimately have to get to. I can tell you what you need to do, but I ultimately am the kind of person, and people like me are the ones that can help you get there. And it all starts with a value proposition. And that value proposition has got to tie into your resume, your LinkedIn profile, targeted individuals. You've got to be able to communicate it. And then there are just so many ways to get the word out. I mentioned early on that the job search is a marketing exercise. It absolutely is. And these are the ways in which you're going to be able to market yourself, because today, especially, there's just so many channels of messaging. Now, I'm just going to share a couple final things here on how you can also, beyond this, accelerate your job search. And I can tell you, first and foremost, you ought to join the North Shore Executive Networking Group. Join our LinkedIn group. Send me an email. Tell me you want to join. There's a lot of good discussions going on there. We post job opportunities, and we have a lot of individuals that ask questions and looking for unbiased, untethered responses, because everybody needs to be candid and open. And here's a few recordings that are available. All these webinars I do, I record them all and I make them available for sale. And I've got a portfolio, a library of so many different webinars on different topics. You can go ahead and check it out. It's at nsenginc.com/webinars. Same goes for our workshops. You can sign up for those. And then the last piece is my coaching. It really comes in two flavors. One is I do have very specific coaching packages. Everything's discounted 20% until the 1st of July. There's bronze, silver, and gold. I have a 16-page job search plan that will keep you busy for weeks. And I have all these recordings of instructional webinars, much like this, but in greater detail and much more hands-on, and they deal with resumes, LinkedIn profiles, interviewing, cover letters, target company lists, and on and on and on. And then I do phone consultations. They're packaged together in this manner with different amounts of time. And if you're looking for somebody to actually do all the work for you, I do customized coaching, and I'll do all the writing and the the critiquing of your resume, your LinkedIn profile. I'll train you on how to interview better. It's us working together and me doing work, handing it over to you, and then we critique how you do it. So I think, Sam, with that in mind, I'm happy to open it up to any questions that you may have gotten. I know
That's
there's a lot of
great.
information we covered here.
Yes, and thank you so much, Marty, for this great presentation. We do have a lot of questions coming in, so thank you to everyone who's engaging with this great content. So here's question number one. How do I network with someone in a new field that I want to learn about? I feel like I can't write an elevator pitch because I don't totally understand the position, and I want to make a fool of myself.
Okay, so I'm going to assume this individual in this question has come from somebody who's early in their career, okay, which is fine. You've decided what industry or industries you want to get into. You got to do some homework. You got to do some homework. You better go online and start looking at, start reading some articles on that industry. What's hot about that industry? What's trending? What are most importantly, what are some of the obstacles? And depending upon your profession, whether you're in supply chain, marketing, sales, finance, what are some of the issues that these kinds of companies in these industries are having relative to your job discipline? And then you've got to think about, okay, now that I've defined, what some of those problems are, I also want to go online and I want to look at some job descriptions in those industries. And this is important. Now, there are certain job functions that are very transferable across industries. The ones that are not are sales, marketing, and to some degree, I would say people on the product side, particularly product management, because we want folks that might come with that experience. But all the others are very, very transferable. And for folks that are early in their career, they're not expecting you to bring a baggage of industry knowledge. But start looking at job descriptions and see what are the keywords and phrases that pop up time and time again in those job descriptions. And those are the points that you want to start to drive home and find things in your background that relate to those specific areas that seem to be a priority for the folks that have written those job descriptions.
Great, thank you. And we have a couple questions rolling in, so I'm gonna squish them all into one. All about networking across state lines, across city lines. How would you recommend networking if you're looking for a job in a different city? Does your approach change at all?
So I think one of the things that you're going to want to do, if let's just take the example, you're here in Chicago, but you want a position in LA. One thing you've got to start doing is connecting with people in LA. I would also suggest that you start finding some LA LinkedIn groups, and there's going to be a ton of them. Okay, every major city has got them. So start acquiring some network contacts out in the area where you want to be. Join some LinkedIn groups out there, and I would start to put together a target company list of companies in that city, and see if you have any connectivity into those companies. Is there anybody who's a first-degree connection to you that also has a first-degree connection into any of those target companies that you've now developed a database for? And if the answer is yes, absolutely, go at it. See if these people can introduce you into some of these folks in a firm that's located in a remote city. And if not, then this is where strong messaging comes in. You've got to be able to write a strong cover letter and demonstrate your value relative to the company or to a specific position that the company might be trying to fill. One of the great things about social media today is that the boundaries are not there anymore. We all can communicate with anybody around the globe. And it makes the job search, quite honestly, a lot easier than it used to be.
And
Sam?
that's particularly important during this era of COVID-19. So maybe can you elaborate a little bit more about any networking tips specific to remote work and networking under COVID-19 conditions?
So, I think that the workforce is going to go through a pretty significant paradigm shift. I, for many years, was a big advocate of allowing anybody who worked for me to work from home if they, if it was warranted or they needed to. And we're going to see that change taking place now, big time. There are a lot of companies that are going to come to the realization that they've been wasting a lot of money on real estate. Chicago's a great example of this, okay? We had so many large companies that set up big campuses in places like Schaumburg, Oak Brook, Deerfield, and many other suburbs. But look what's happened over the last 5 years in particular. All these large companies are migrating back into the city. They want to get that young talent. That's many of you on this call right now. And the fact is that, the young talent, is where so many companies are going to be growing. So, I think you're going to see that they're going to allow a lot more people to work from home as we start to even come out of COVID, because I think a lot of companies are recognize that, employees can be just as productive, in some cases more productive than working in an office. And they could save a lot of money by cutting down on all that, brick and mortar, and being a lot more flexible with people and people's time and how they manage their time.
We've got a couple of LinkedIn related questions here. So first of all, do you suggest accepting all LinkedIn connection requests, or should you be a little bit more careful about who you're accepting connections with? And then second, would you recommend connecting with the hiring manager and maybe even reaching out over LinkedIn if you haven't heard back about a job you've applied for?
Okay. There are very few LinkedIn connections that I do not accept. And so one message to all of you: if we're not connected, feel free to send me one. I will accept every one of them. Okay. The only LinkedIn connections that I don't accept are people that are obviously trying to sell me something. And that's usually they want to help me with my website, or they want to sell me software. And oftentimes they're overseas. And so those are the only ones that I tend to reject. But to me, every connection has potential value to me, not necessarily because of who they are, but it's who they're connected to. And it just gives me visibility. Think about this. I've got 13,000 LinkedIn connections. Every one of my LinkedIn connections, on average, has about 1,000 connections. So when you connect with me, theoretically, you're getting connection to 13 million people. I'm one person. Granted, we may have some overlap. So we cut it in half. I'll give you connectivity to over 6 million people, worst case. So it's important. The second half of that question again was?
Would you suggest connecting with a hiring manager on LinkedIn, and maybe particularly if you haven't heard from them yet?
Yeah, you got to be careful with this because you don't want to appear creepy, okay, or stalking. So when you're engaged, if you already had if you've had an interview, there's nothing wrong with, after the interview, connecting with that person. But leading up to that interview, I don't necessarily suggest, linking in with them, because you may get very disappointed. You might send out an invitation to them, and I've seen this happen with a lot of job seekers, and that for whatever reason, they've decided not to accept it. And now you're going, what in the world's going on here? Hey, wait, this person even came in, they checked me out, they looked at my LinkedIn profile, I saw that they did. So I sent them a LinkedIn request. But if they don't accept it, it can be very disheartening to you. Now, if they check you out, I would say, yeah, that's okay, because your message back to them can be very specific. I noticed that you looked at my LinkedIn profile. I'd welcome the opportunity to connect with you, and leave it at that. But if that has not happened, and you just want to connect with somebody who you think is the hiring manager, I don't know that I would do that. I would almost prefer, quite honestly, that many of your communications be done outside of the LinkedIn platform. Now, there are going to be people that disagree with that, but I think it's much better to communicate directly to somebody's inbox in their place of work, because most people on their LinkedIn profile, they're putting their personal email address, And oftentimes people don't read those LinkedIn connections or invitations or in-mails as seriously because they think they're either looking for a job or they're trying to sell me something. So I would prefer that you send it directly to their inbox at their work email address, and continue to link in with all kinds of people. But when it comes to the hiring manager, if you haven't already had an interaction with them, I might suggest that you hold off and instead send them a direct email. It gets right to the point. Sam?
Great. And we've got a couple questions about this topic. How should your networking strategy change if you're looking for a promotion within your company or looking to move up in your company rather than looking to change jobs entirely?
Okay, so and I've worked in a few large companies, and things can get obviously very political. Um, I think the approach that you need to take is you need to understand the organizational structure. Okay, you are here, but you want to get over here. Okay, what does that organization look like? Who are the people that you need to make your background visible to? And then I would just start reaching out to them. Okay, so you're already in the company, you understand the culture in the company. You now need to find a way to make your background and the value, just like any job seeker, known to the people that are in a position to make decisions. Okay, and it may be multiple folks, and that's okay. If you're in a finance role, it might be somebody at the director level and somebody at the VP level. It might be broken down to different functions at the director or manager level. Any number of things, but don't be afraid to reach out to people, because I think people inherently are pretty modest and somewhat on the shy side. So by going slightly in the opposite direction and being a little bit bolder and letting people know that, you know what, you're proactive, you take the initiative, you know what you're looking for, and you can be very clear and concise. We like that. We want to hire people like that. We want people on our team that get right to it. And to me, that delivers a really strong and positive message.
Great. Okay, so here's a question. You've got the job. Hooray. What is the next step for your network? Maybe the people that you met, you had phone calls with, that you've emailed, maybe they didn't necessarily help you get the position, but you want to stay in touch. What should you do now?
So one of the things one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to change your LinkedIn profile. Okay, you may not do it the next day or your first day, that's up to you. But every person that you've had contact with through your network, every networking contact that you touched during the course of your journey, go back and thank them. You've got to thank people, because I can tell you in 3 years, 5 years or more, you may be repeating this, and you don't want people to feel as though you took advantage of them. You want them to know that you really appreciated what they did for you. And at the same time, you want to let them know the good news. I've moved on. I got myself a great job, great company. And I think they will love to hear that, because they did, in some small way, in some cases, played a part in that. Because on that journey, you learned something with every person you met. They may not have been the conduit to your next company, but there was something that took place there that you took with you, that you learned and applied with all the other meetings that took place after that. But please be very appreciative of people, because I can tell you, with the way jobs are today, it's not unusual to be switching every 2, 3, or 4 years. And you will be reaching back to your network again. And you want to make sure they remember you in a very positive light.
I think that's great advice to end on. And there are a few more questions that have rolled in. Marty and I talked about this, and he'd love for you to reach out on LinkedIn to him with your questions if we weren't able to answer them on our webinar today. I've just got a couple closing remarks here. So our Young Alumni Career Development Series will continue all summer long with free online professional development webinars and networking opportunities designed for alumni who've graduated within the last 10 years. Our next webinar of the series will be taking place on Tuesday, June 30th, and that's titled Preparation, Presence, and Practice, the 3 Fundamentals of Public Speaking. In this webinar, we'll talk about the fundamentals of public speaking that help us become better speakers and then more effective leaders. So join us to learn strategies to engage your audience and successfully structure your presentation. I think this will be a great follow-up to what we've learned from Marty today. We're also going to be hosting our regular Alumni Coffee and Conversations online networking event this Friday, June 19th, where you'll be paired randomly with alumni from all over the world for a series of speed networking video conversations over Zoom in a small group, one-on-one or maybe groups of 3. And I think this is actually the perfect opportunity to put your newly acquired networking skills into practice. A great way to meet people when we can't actually go to networking events in person right now. And then finally, Marty mentioned the value of joining LinkedIn groups during his presentation. So I would encourage all of you to join the UChicago Alumni LinkedIn group if you aren't already a member. And I'll send a link to this group in my follow-up email. I'll also be sending a link to the group that Marty mentioned, the NSENG group as well. You can visit our events page at careers.uchicagoalumni.org for the full list of upcoming online programs. And then you'll see a survey at the close of this meeting. So please do share your feedback. We're always looking for ways to improve our programs. And I would love to share your kudos with Marty as well. Thank you everyone who's joined us on the line. Marty, a special thank you to you. We really appreciate your valuable feedback.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate being included.
Take care and have a great day, everybody.
All right, you too.